The mysterious arrival. It was a quiet night in the small town of Oak Ridge. The sky was dark, only lit by the faint glow of stars and the crescent moon hanging like a silver smile. The streets were empty, and the only sound was the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. But suddenly, something strange happened. The peace of the night was shattered by a bright, blinding light that appeared out of nowhere. At first, no one knew what it was. People who were still awake looked up, squinting into the sky. The light was unlike anything they had ever seen before. It wasn't like a plane, or a shooting star, or any normal kind of light. It was large, round, and pulsating with an eerie glow. It moved across the sky in an unnatural way, faster than any aircraft. For a moment, it hovered, as if watching the earth below, and then, with a sudden flash, it descended rapidly towards the nearby forest. The town's small, quiet population was filled with confusion. Whispers spread quickly through the streets. "What was that?" people asked. "Is it some kind of signal?" No one could answer, but fear began to take hold. The town had always been calm, away from the noise of the city, but tonight was different. It felt as if something extraordinary was about to happen. Within minutes, everyone who was awake gathered near the edge of the forest. Some of them were scared, others curious, but all were drawn by the strange phenomenon in the sky. It wasn't long before the ground shook. A loud, low rumble echoed through the trees, as if something heavy had landed. The town was silent now, and the tension in the air was thick. What was this mysterious visitor? Was it a threat, or something else entirely? In the heart of the forest, just past the trees, the bright light began to fade, leaving only a soft, glowing trail in the dark sky. There, in a clearing, something else appeared. A figure emerged from the light, and a crowd gasped in shock. The figure was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. She stood tall, with smooth, dark skin that seemed to shimmer under the moonlight. Her eyes glowed with an unnatural light, a piercing, bright yellow that contrasted sharply with the darkness around her. Her head was shaped differently, with a smooth, round skull, and from her back stretched two large, majestic wings. They were feathers, but unlike any bird on earth. They had a strange metallic sheen to them, almost like they were part of her body, not just feathers. Her wings fluttered softly, lifting her higher off the ground, and the crowd gasped in awe. She moved with grace, as if floating just above the earth, her feet never truly touching the ground. The air around her seemed to hum with energy. But there was something unsettling about her presence. The bird woman's appearance was not just strange, it was otherworldly, as if she had come from a place far beyond Earth. She didn't look like she was from another country, or even from another planet. She looked like she didn't belong here at all. She was from somewhere far more distant. Her beauty was both captivating and terrifying. For a moment, she simply stood there, as if taking in the view of the town and the people who stared at her in disbelief. She didn't speak, but her eyes moved across the crowd, scanning them one by one, as if searching for something or someone. Her gaze was intense, focused. Mark, a young man from the town who had come out to see what all the fuss was about, stood at the front of the crowd. He was just an ordinary guy, nothing special, nothing extraordinary about him. But as he looked at the bird woman, he felt a strange pull. Something about her drew him in. He didn't feel fear. Instead, he felt an unexplainable connection. Without thinking, Mark stepped forward, away from the crowd. The others looked at him in surprise, unsure whether he was brave or foolish. As he took a step toward her, the bird woman's head tilted slightly, as if she had noticed him. Mark stopped a few feet away from her, feeling both nervous and strangely calm at the same time. The bird woman lowered herself gently to the ground, her wings folding behind her. She was taller than Mark, and he couldn't help but notice how different her skin looked up close, almost metallic, but also soft, like nothing he had ever seen before. Her eyes shone brightly in the darkness, almost as if they were alive with intelligence and mystery. For a moment, there was silence. No one spoke, no one moved. The world seemed to stop, as if holding its breath. The bird woman looked at Mark, her gaze unwavering. She didn't make a sound. The tension in the air grew thicker, and Mark felt a chill run down his spine. But something inside him told him not to be afraid. There was something important about this moment, something he couldn't yet understand. Finally, Mark gathered his courage and spoke. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice steady, though his heart was racing. "Why are you here?" The bird woman's eyes locked onto his, and she tilted her head again, as if contemplating his question. She didn't respond with words, but her gaze seemed to speak volumes. It was as if she was asking him the same question, searching for answers in him as well. Then, without a word, she turned and began walking towards the center of the forest, her wings brushing the air softly. Mark stood there, still unsure of what was happening, but feeling an undeniable urge to follow her. What had just arrived in their small town? And what did this strange, beautiful alien want from them? Mark couldn't shake the feeling that the answers were just beyond reach, hidden in the dark, mysterious forest. As he turned to follow her, the crowd behind him watched, wondering what would happen next. Would Mark find the answers he sought? And more importantly, what was the bird woman's true purpose for coming to Earth? The night was far from over, and the mystery was just beginning. The unexpected encounter. Mark's feet felt heavy as he stepped forward, following the alien bird woman into the forest. The crowd behind him whispered among themselves, their voices filled with confusion and curiosity. But Mark couldn't focus on them. His entire attention was drawn to the mysterious figure ahead. Her every movement seemed otherworldly, graceful yet powerful, like something from another realm entirely. He didn't know why, but something deep within him told him he had to follow her. The trees loomed tall and silent as he walked deeper into the forest. The moonlight barely filtered through the thick canopy, casting long shadows that danced with the wind. The bird woman moved silently, her glowing eyes scanning the surroundings, her wings folding tightly behind her. Her presence felt like an electric charge in the air, filling the forest with an almost tangible energy. Mark kept his distance but stayed close enough to see her clearly. She wasn't just some alien being. She looked ancient, timeless, as though she had existed for centuries. Her wings shimmered softly in the moonlight, and the feathers seemed to change color with every movement. They weren't just feathers. They were metallic, almost like a living armor, giving her an intimidating yet majestic appearance. The further they walked, the more Mark felt an overwhelming sense of being in the presence of something powerful, something beyond his understanding. He had heard stories of aliens, of strange beings from distant stars, but this felt different. This felt real. And the connection between them, though unspoken, was undeniable. They came to a clearing in the forest, and the bird woman stopped. The trees here were older, their trunks thick with age and wisdom. The air was cooler, filled with the scent of damp earth and pine. Mark stopped a few paces behind her, unsure of what to do next. His mind raced with questions. Why had she come here? What did she want with him? Why had she chosen him to follow? The bird woman turned her head slightly, glancing over her shoulder at Mark. Her gaze was intense, but there was something almost comforting about it. It was as if she could see right through him, past the surface, and into the core of his being. For a moment, Mark felt as though she understood him in a way no human ever had. Mark took another step forward, his voice barely a whisper. "What are you?" he asked, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. The bird woman didn't respond immediately. Instead, she raised her hand, her long fingers stretching out as if reaching for something. Mark followed her gesture, his eyes searching the space around them. Then, the air around them began to change. A soft hum filled the silence, and a faint glow emerged from the ground beneath their feet. Mark's heart skipped a beat. He had no idea what was happening, but he couldn't tear his eyes away. The ground started to glow brighter, and strange symbols began to appear on the surface, etched into the earth as if by an invisible hand. They glowed with an eerie blue light, pulsing softly. Mark blinked in disbelief. "What is this?" he muttered, almost to himself. The bird woman stepped forward, her feet barely touching the ground, and knelt down. She placed her hand over the glowing symbols. The humming sound grew louder, and the symbols began to shift, rearranging themselves like a puzzle coming together. Mark watched in awe, his mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. It was like watching magic unfold right in front of his eyes. Suddenly, the air seemed to grow thicker, and Mark could feel the weight of something heavy in the atmosphere. The bird woman's eyes glowed brighter, and her voice, soft yet powerful, finally filled the silence. "I am called Zeria," she said, her words strange yet somehow familiar. "I come from a world far beyond yours, a world lost to time and space. I seek help, but I cannot explain everything to you. Not yet. There are things you must understand first." Mark's breath caught in his throat. Her voice was unlike anything he had ever heard. It didn't sound like a language, yet he understood every word. The way she spoke was almost like a melody, with an ancient rhythm that seemed to resonate deep within him. Zeria stood and turned to face him fully. Her eyes never left his, and the intensity of her gaze made him feel like he was being pulled into her world. She didn't seem afraid or hostile, only determined, as though she had a mission to complete. And Mark, somehow, was a part of it. "Why me?" Mark finally asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Why did you choose me?" Zeria's expression softened, and for the first time, Mark saw a flicker of emotion in her eyes. There was sadness there, hidden beneath the surface, but also a glimmer of hope. "Because you are not like the others," she answered, her voice low. "You are more connected to the energy of your world than you realize. You're kind. You have the potential to help me, to help save what remains of my people." Mark's mind was reeling. He could hardly process what she was saying. "Your people? What happened to them?" Zeria's wings fluttered gently, the metallic feathers catching the light. Her eyes lowered slightly, and she seemed to hesitate, as though choosing her words carefully. "The planet I come from is dying," she said quietly. "A great war destroyed it. My people were scattered, and now I am one of the last of my kind. I have come to Earth in search of a way to heal what is broken, to find the energy that can save my world. But the path is dangerous, and I cannot do it alone." Mark felt a deep sense of pity for her people, her planet, destroyed by war. It was a story all too familiar to him, but this was different. She was real. She was here, standing in front of him, seeking help. The weight of her words pressed on him, and he felt the pull of responsibility begin to grow inside him. You want me to help you save your world?" Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zeria nodded, her glowing eyes fixed on him. "Yes, Mark. You are the one I have chosen. You have the strength within you, even if you do not yet know it. Will you help me?" Mark stood frozen for a moment, the reality of the situation sinking in. He wasn't some hero from a story. He was just a regular guy. But there was something about Zeria, something about the urgency in her eyes, that made him want to say yes. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him. In that moment, Mark realized that his life, his entire world, was about to change forever. The adventure, the danger, and the mystery were only just beginning. And somehow, he knew he couldn't turn back now. "Yes," he said, his voice steady. "I'll help you." Zeria's eyes lit up with a mixture of relief and gratitude, and for the first time since Mark had met her, a faint smile touched her lips. But even as she seemed to relax, Mark knew that the path ahead was anything but simple. There were dangers lurking in the unknown, and the weight of what she had asked him to do would not be easy to bear. But Mark had made his choice. He would help her. He had to. The future of a world far beyond his own depended on it. A mysterious message. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath as Mark stood beside Zeria, still processing the words she had just spoken. The quiet was unnerving, as if the trees themselves were waiting for something to happen. The stars above twinkled faintly, and the air had a strange stillness to it. It was as if the world had paused for a moment, waiting for Mark's next move. Zaria turned away from him, her wings unfurling in a slow, deliberate motion. She moved toward the center of the clearing, where the strange symbols on the ground still glowed softly. Mark followed her, his heart racing. He had agreed to help her, but what had he truly committed to? The unknown stretched before him like a vast ocean, and he had no idea what awaited him on the other side. As Zaria approached the symbols, she knelt down again, her long fingers hovering just above them. The glowing light beneath her hand pulsed rhythmically, almost as if it were alive. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, Mark wondered if she was going to speak again. But instead, a soft hum filled the air, so faint that it could have been the wind, or perhaps something deeper, something coming from the very earth itself. Mark watched in awe as the symbols began to shift once more. This time, they didn't just rearrange. They seemed to come to life. The lines of light twisted and turned, forming intricate patterns that moved with purpose, as though they were part of a larger, unseen force. He could feel the energy in the air intensifying, and he instinctively took a step back, his eyes wide with amazement. Zaria's wings fluttered gently, sending ripples through the air. Her head tilted as she watched the symbols, her face a mask of concentration. The humming sound grew louder, vibrating through Mark's chest, as if calling to something deep within him. He had never felt anything like it before. This pull, this connection, as though the symbols were speaking directly to him. Without opening her eyes, Zaria spoke again, her voice low and distant. "The message is here. It is coming." Mark's stomach tightened. "The message? What message?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zaria's eyes flickered open, and for the briefest moment, Mark thought he saw a flash of something. Fear, perhaps, or maybe desperation. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. She stood and motioned for Mark to come closer. "The message is not for me alone," she explained, her voice now steady. "It is for both of us. We are connected, Mark. My world, my people, what remains of them, need this message. The energy here, the energy of your planet, is the key. You may not understand it now, but you will." Mark's mind raced. The symbols, the glowing energy. It was all overwhelming. And yet, there was something oddly comforting about Zaria's presence. She wasn't like any alien he had imagined before. She wasn't here to conquer or destroy. She was here to save. But save what? And how? Zaria reached out and touched one of the glowing symbols. Instantly, the air around them seemed to change. The energy in the clearing shifted, swirling like a storm trapped in a small space. Mark felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up as the symbols flared brightly, casting sharp shadows around them. And then, just as suddenly, the light faded, leaving a soft glow in its place. A deep, resonant voice filled the clearing. Though it did not come from Zaria, it seemed to come from the earth itself, or perhaps from the symbols, as though the ground was speaking to them. Mark's heart pounded in his chest as the voice echoed in the stillness. "The end is near. The choice is yours. The past is lost, but the future can be saved." Mark's eyes widened. The voice was ancient, its tone deep and powerful. It was unlike any human voice, and yet it felt strangely familiar, as though it had been speaking to him for a long time. The words seemed to echo in his mind, reverberating like a distant thunderclap. "The end is near," Mark repeated, his voice shaky. "What does that mean? What's coming?" Zaria's face grew somber, her wings folding tightly against her back. "The message is cryptic, yes, but it is clear. The war that destroyed my people, that destroyed my world, is not over. It was only a beginning. The forces that caused it are still out there, and they are coming. My people are scattered, but the danger, it threatens your world as well." Mark felt a chill run through him. The voice had spoken of the past being lost, but the future could still be saved. He didn't understand it fully, but one thing was clear. They weren't just fighting for Zuria's world. They were fighting for Earth too. How do we stop it? Mark asked, his voice barely a whisper. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him, but he didn't know what he could do. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a hero. He was just a guy from a small town. But Zarya had chosen him, and now he was caught in something far bigger than he ever could have imagined. Zarya stood tall, her wings stretching slightly as she turned to face him. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but we must find the source of the threat. The message was not complete, and it will take time to decipher. But we cannot wait too long. The forces that destroyed my world are waking again, and they will not rest until they have finished what they started." Mark's mind raced as he tried to process the enormity of it all. His life had just taken a turn he couldn't have predicted, and the path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty. He wanted to run. He wanted to go back to his normal life, to the safety of his home. But deep inside, he knew he couldn't. Zarya had trusted him. She had chosen him for a reason, and somehow he had to find the strength to help her. The clearing had grown darker as the night wore on, the glowing symbols now dimming to a soft glow. Zarya's voice broke through the silence once more, steady and calm despite the weight of their situation. "We will find the answers," she said, determination in her eyes. "Together." Mark nodded, though he still didn't fully understand what he was getting into. But as he looked at Zarya, standing tall and resolute, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't alone in this. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. And somehow they would stop the forces that threatened not just her world, but his as well. As the first light of dawn began to break through the trees, Mark realized that the true journey was only just beginning. The mysterious message had come, but there was much more to discover, much more to fight for. The surprise revelation. The first rays of dawn broke through the thick canopy above, painting the forest in hues of orange and gold. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and pine, and a soft breeze began to stir the leaves. Mark stood silently beside Zarya, still processing the strange and cryptic message they had received. It had been hours since the symbols had faded, and the weight of the revelation still hung heavy in the air. Despite the beauty of the forest around him, Mark could hardly shake the sense of foreboding that had taken root in his chest. Zarya had been quiet ever since the voice had spoken, her wings folded tightly behind her, as if she were lost in thought. Mark could sense that she was grappling with something deep inside her, something she hadn't yet shared with him. As much as he wanted to ask her more questions, he knew now wasn't the right time. There was something more she needed to say, something important. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Zarya spoke. Her voice was calm, but there was an underlying tension in her words. "Mark," she said, her eyes looking directly into his, "there's something I haven't told you. Something that may change everything you think you know about this mission." Mark's heart skipped a beat. His mind raced with possibilities, each more confusing than the last. He nodded, silently urging her to continue. Zarya took a deep breath, as if bracing herself, before speaking again. "You've been chosen for more than just your connection to Earth," she began slowly. "There's more to you, Mark. You carry something inside you, something that makes you uniquely suited for the path ahead." Mark's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean? What's inside me?" Zarya's eyes glowed faintly, a mixture of sadness and hope flickering in their depths. "I can feel it," she said quietly. "There's a reason you were drawn to me, a reason why the energy here responded to you. It's not just coincidence." She paused, as if carefully considering her next words. "You're not just human." Mark's mind went blank. "What are you talking about?" "Of course, I'm human. I'm from Oak Ridge, for crying out loud." He laughed nervously, but the weight of her words made the sound hollow. Zarya didn't smile. "I understand this is hard to believe," she said softly, "but I've seen it before. There are certain humans, a rare few, who are born with the ability to tap into a power far beyond normal comprehension. Your ancestors were part of a much older lineage, one that stretches across the stars. Mark felt a chill run through him. The thought of not being fully human unsettled him. But Zaria's words were filled with such conviction that he couldn't dismiss them outright. His heart pounded in his chest, and a sense of confusion and wonder flooded his mind. "I don't understand. How is that even possible?" Mark asked, his voice trembling slightly. "I don't have any powers. I'm just a regular guy." Zaria shook her head, her wings fluttering softly behind her. "No, Mark. It's not about what you can do right now. It's about what you are. Your bloodline has been dormant for centuries, but the connection to the stars, this power, has always been there, hidden inside you. It's why you could sense the energy when you first saw me. It's why the symbols responded to you." Mark's mind was spinning. This couldn't be real. He was just a regular guy who worked at a small-town diner. He didn't have any special abilities or hidden powers. He had never felt any different from anyone else. But Zaria's gaze was steady, and there was no doubt in her eyes. She believed every word she was saying. "But why me?" Mark asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why am I the one chosen? What makes me so special?" Zaria sighed, her wings folding tighter against her back. "I can't fully explain it yet, Mark. But the message we received, it wasn't just a warning. It was a call for help. The forces that destroyed my world, they're coming for Earth as well. And only someone with your heritage can help stop them." Mark's heart sank. The weight of her words was suffocating. He wasn't just caught up in some strange encounter with an alien. Now he was being told that he had to fight to save Earth from an unimaginable danger, and he had no idea how. "The war that destroyed my world, it wasn't just about power or resources," Zaria continued. "It was about control. A ruthless force, one that has existed for centuries, has been systematically eliminating civilizations across the galaxy. My people tried to fight back, but we were outmatched. The war tore my world apart." Mark's stomach turned as he imagined the devastation Zaria had witnessed. So it wasn't just an accident. It wasn't just some random destruction. "No," Zaria said firmly. "It was deliberate. And now, they're targeting Earth. Your world has something they want, something powerful. I don't know exactly what it is yet, but we have to find it before they do. We don't have much time." Mark's mind was a blur of questions and thoughts. He was just an ordinary guy. How was he supposed to fight an enemy like this? What kind of power could he even have? But as he looked at Zaria, standing tall and unwavering in front of him, he realized that the answers wouldn't come easily. The path ahead would be dangerous, and he might not survive it. But something inside him stirred, an ancient instinct, perhaps. He had to keep going. For Zaria, for his world. "I'll help you," Mark said, his voice stronger now, despite the fear that gripped him. "But you have to tell me everything. You have to tell me what I'm supposed to do." Zaria nodded, her eyes softening. "I will, Mark. I promise. But first, we need to find the key to stopping them. It's hidden somewhere on your planet. And you are the key to unlocking it." Mark didn't fully understand what she meant, but there was no time to question it. The world was in danger, and whether he liked it or not, his life had just taken a turn that would lead him into the unknown. The forest around them seemed to hum with the energy of what was to come. The sky above them, once quiet and peaceful, now felt charged with purpose. Mark didn't know how, but somehow, deep within him, he felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. And so, with the weight of their mission pressing down on him, Mark and Zaria set off into the unknown, their journey just beginning, as the mystery of Mark's hidden power unfolded before them. Facing the danger together, the air around them grew heavy, and the forest seemed to close in as Mark and Zaria made their way through the dense underbrush. The first light of dawn was beginning to give way to the bright, unforgiving sunlight, but the sense of urgency still clung to the air. Mark's mind raced, struggling to come to terms with everything he had learned in the past few hours. The fact that he wasn't just an ordinary guy, that he had some hidden connection to the stars, felt like too much to comprehend all at once. As they walked, Zaria's wings fluttered gently behind her, her presence calm but intense. Despite the enormity of their situation, she seemed composed, her every movement deliberate, as though she had faced dangers like this before. But Mark had never been in a situation like this. His world had been simple, safe, predictable. Now, everything had changed. "So, what's next?" Mark asked, trying to push past his anxiety. "How do we find this key? What exactly are we looking for?" Zaria glanced over her shoulder at him, her glowing eyes scanning the horizon. "We need to go to a place known as the Vault of the Ancients," she said, her voice steady. "It's hidden deep within the mountains, beyond the reach of most civilizations. The key we need is there, and we'll have to fight for it." "Fight for it?" Mark's stomach tightened at the word. "You said this enemy is powerful. What if we don't make it in time? What if we fail?" Zaria didn't answer immediately. Instead, she paused, her head tilting as if listening for something in the distance. Mark watched her, unsure whether she had heard something he hadn't, but then she turned back to him, her expression serious, but not without a hint of reassurance. "Failure isn't an option, Mark," she said quietly. "But you're not alone in this. I didn't bring you into this fight just to watch you fail. I believe in you. The power inside you, it's there for a reason. I've seen it. You have the strength to do this." Mark swallowed hard. He wanted to believe her, but the doubt still lingered. He wasn't a warrior. He was a simple guy, and this was a battle he had never asked for. But looking into Zaria's eyes, seeing the trust she had in him, he felt a flicker of something within himself, a feeling he hadn't expected. Maybe she was right. Maybe there was more to him than he realized. They walked in silence for a few more moments, the quiet of the forest settling around them. The sounds of distant birds and rustling leaves seemed almost out of place with the weight of the situation they were in. But as they moved deeper into the forest, the air began to change. It felt colder, and the atmosphere grew tense, like the earth itself was holding its breath. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the trees. Mark whipped his head toward the noise, his heart skipping a beat. Zaria immediately tensed, her wings twitching as her body shifted into a defensive stance. She was alert now, her eyes scanning the surrounding woods with a sharp focus. "They'd found us," she murmured under her breath. Mark's chest tightened as he realized that the danger was already here. He wasn't sure what they were, but the fear in Zaria's eyes told him it was something he needed to be ready for. Out of the corner of his eye, Mark saw a flicker of movement, fast, shadowy, and unfamiliar. Before he could react, something leaped from the trees, landing with a bone-rattling thud in front of them. The creature was massive, towering over Mark, its body covered in dark, armored plating that gleamed menacingly in the sunlight. Its eyes glowed red, burning with a primal hunger, and its mouth opened to reveal rows of jagged teeth. Mark froze, fear flooding his veins. This was no ordinary creature. It was like something out of a nightmare. Zaria's wings flared behind her as she stepped forward, placing herself between Mark and the creature. Her voice was calm but laced with authority. "Stay back, Mark," she ordered. "This is a Skarik warrior. They were bred for battle. Formidable, relentless. But I can handle this." Mark's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing. He wanted to help, to do something. Anything. But Zaria had said to stay back. He watched as she faced the beast, her body poised and ready, as though she had fought creatures like this before. Mark didn't doubt her strength, but seeing the Skarik up close made him realize just how out of his depth he was. The Skarik growled, its deep voice vibrating the air. It crouched low, ready to attack. Zaria's wings snapped open, and in one fluid motion, she lunged at the creature, her talons glowing with energy. The battle that followed was intense, faster than Mark could process. Zeria moved with precision and power, her talons slashing through the air as she dodged the Scarab's vicious strikes. Mark stood frozen, his mind torn between wanting to help and knowing he wasn't prepared for this kind of fight. But as he watched Zeria face the creature with unmatched determination, something inside him stirred. He could feel the tension in his body, the adrenaline rushing through his veins. It was as though the energy Zeria had spoken of was awakening within him, pushing him to act. Without thinking, Mark reached for a nearby branch, swinging it like a makeshift weapon. His hands were shaky, but he gripped it tightly and ran toward the battle. He wasn't sure what he thought he could do, but he couldn't just stand there anymore. As he neared Zeria and the Scarab, he swung the branch at the creature, hoping to distract it. The Scarab hissed and turned toward Mark, its glowing red eyes narrowing. The moment of hesitation gave Zeria the opening she needed. She seized the opportunity, her wings flapping with force as she launched herself into the air, bringing her talons down in a decisive strike. The Scarab let out a deafening roar, its body convulsing before it collapsed to the ground, lifeless. Mark stood there, breathless, his heart racing. The creature lay motionless at Zeria's feet, its once menacing form now reduced to a lifeless heap. Zeria turned to him, her eyes glowing faintly with something that could almost be described as pride. "You did well," she said, her voice calm but with a note of approval. Mark's hands were still trembling as he let go of the branch. He hadn't done much, but somehow his small act had helped. I didn't think I could do that," he said, still processing what had just happened. Zeria stepped closer, her wings folding back behind her. "You can. You will. You're stronger than you think, Mark. This fight is only beginning, but I believe in you." Mark's chest tightened as he realized that this was just the first of many battles to come. The Scarab was only the beginning of the dangers they would face. But despite the fear and uncertainty gnawing at him, Mark felt a spark of determination. He had a purpose now. He wasn't just a bystander in this fight. He was part of something far greater. Together, they moved forward into the unknown, the forest still humming with energy. The vault of the ancients awaited them, and with it, the key to saving both their worlds. Mark had no idea what challenges lay ahead, but he knew one thing for sure. Zeria wasn't alone in this fight anymore, and neither was he. The true battle had only just begun. A dangerous escape. The sun was now high in the sky, casting its harsh rays through the trees as Mark and Zeria continued their journey deeper into the heart of the forest. Their pace had quickened after the battle with the Scarab warrior, but the weight of what had just happened still hung heavily in the air. Mark's hands trembled slightly from the adrenaline, and his mind kept replaying the moment when he had stepped in, despite knowing he was outmatched. Yet, in the midst of the fear, something had clicked within him. He was no longer just a bystander. He was a part of this fight, and no matter how terrifying it might be, he was committed to seeing it through. Zeria had barely spoken since the fight. Her focus was unwavering, her eyes scanning the horizon, as if she could sense something Mark couldn't. Despite the battle they'd just survived, she seemed calm, poised, almost serene. It was as if she was used to this kind of danger, like her entire existence had been built around facing these challenges. Mark, on the other hand, felt like a fish out of water. He had never been in a real fight before, and the reality of what they were facing still felt surreal. But as they trekked through the dense woods, moving away from the scene of the battle, a new sense of urgency began to build between them. He knew they were on a mission to stop something far bigger than either of them, and time was running out. Zeria broke the silence, her voice steady, but filled with an unmistakable urgency. "We're getting close to the vault, but we can't be too reckless. We need to move quickly, but quietly. They will be looking for us now, and if we're caught, everything will be for nothing." Mark nodded, though his thoughts were still clouded by the fight. He couldn't help but feel that every step they took brought them closer to danger. It wasn't just the Scarab that threatened them. It was something far more insidious. The enemy they were up against wasn't just an alien force. It was a shadow, a force that had been hunting civilizations across the stars for eons. And Earth was next on their list. Suddenly, Zeria stopped in her tracks. Her head tilted slightly, and her wings fluttered ever so gently. Mark, sensing the change, immediately followed suit, his hand instinctively reaching for the branch he had used earlier. His heart pounded in his chest as he waited for Zeria to speak. "They're here," Zeria said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark froze. He didn't know how she could sense it, but if she said they were close, he believed her. The air around them seemed to thicken, and every rustling leaf, every crack of a twig underfoot, felt amplified. The forest that had seemed peaceful moments ago now felt oppressive, as if it was closing in around them. Mark's breath became shallow as he tried to listen for any sign of movement. Before he could react, there was a sound, a crack of branches breaking far ahead of them. Mark's eyes widened as he quickly glanced at Zeria. She nodded once, her wings extending slightly as she prepared herself for what was to come. From the underbrush ahead, figures began to emerge, dark silhouettes moving swiftly through the trees. They were humanoid in shape, but clad in dark, sleek armor that glinted in the dim light. Mark's heart sank. These weren't just random alien creatures. They were soldiers, elite warriors sent to hunt them down. Zeria's warning had been clear. They were after them. "They're not just following us," Zeria muttered, her voice tense. "They know what we're looking for." Mark felt a chill run down his spine. The Vault of the Ancients wasn't just a place of power, it was a secret. If these soldiers found it, they would not only destroy any hope of saving Zeria's world, but Earth as well. Zeria raised her hand, signaling for Mark to stay still. She crouched low, her wings folded tight against her body, blending seamlessly into the shadows. Mark did the same, his breathing slow and steady as he tried to control the rising panic in his chest. He could feel the tension building, the sense of inevitability hanging in the air. The soldiers moved closer, their footsteps barely making the sound. Mark's heart was pounding, and for a moment, he felt certain they would be discovered. They were outnumbered, outmatched, and with the vault so close, they couldn't afford to be caught now. Then, without warning, Zeria leaped into action. Her wings unfurled with a powerful snap, and in a blur of motion, she darted toward the soldiers. Her talons flashed like silver, slicing through the air with precision and speed. The soldiers were caught off guard, their formation breaking as they tried to react. But Zeria was too fast. She moved like a force of nature, her body flowing through the trees as she took down one soldier after another with expert precision. Mark watched in awe as Zeria fought. He had never seen anything like it before. She was more than a warrior. She was a force of nature, a living storm of power and grace. But even as she fought with deadly skill, Mark could see the toll it was taking on her. Each movement was a calculated strike, but each strike left her slightly more drained, more vulnerable. And then, as if summoned by the chaos, more soldiers appeared from the shadows, more than Mark had imagined. They moved quickly, surrounding Zeria on all sides. Despite her ferocity, the tide was beginning to turn. Zeria was powerful, but she was only one person, and the soldiers were relentless. "Zeria," Mark shouted, snapping out of his daze. He couldn't just stand there. Not when she was risking everything. Without thinking, he charged forward, grabbing a fallen soldier's blaster rifle from the ground. He wasn't sure how to use it, but desperation gave him the strength to try. He fired it once, twice, before hitting one of the soldiers in the arm. The soldier staggered back, giving Zeria the opening she needed to finish her attack. Zeria's eyes flicked toward Mark, and for the first time, he saw something akin to gratitude in her gaze. But there was no time to dwell on it. The soldiers were still closing in, and the threat was far from over. "We need to go," Zeria said quickly, her wings flapping urgently. Now, Mark didn't need any further encouragement. With Zeria at his side, he turned and sprinted toward the edge of the forest. The Vault of the Ancients was close, So close, he could almost feel the weight of it on his shoulders. But the soldiers weren't far behind, and every step they took felt like a race against time. The forest seemed to stretch on endlessly, each tree a barrier between them and the safety of the vault. Mark's legs burned, his breath came in short gasps, but Zaria was beside him, her presence a constant reminder that they weren't alone in this fight. They pushed forward, desperate to reach their destination before it was too late. As they neared the edge of the forest, the sound of pursuit grew louder. Mark's heart pounded in his chest, but he kept running. They were almost there. The vault was within their grasp, and with it, the key to saving not only Zaria's world, but Earth as well. But just as they emerged from the trees, the ground beneath them trembled. Mark's heart skipped a beat, and he turned to see what had caused it. The soldiers weren't the only ones chasing them. Something far worse was waiting just ahead, a force that would stop them at all costs. The real fight was about to begin. A new beginning. The moment Mark and Zaria stepped into the clearing, the full magnitude of what lay before them hit him like a wave crashing against the shore. The vault of the ancients stood tall and imposing, its stone exterior covered in centuries of moss and ancient markings. It was a structure that had survived the ravages of time, its purpose hidden from the eyes of most. But Mark knew this was no ordinary place. It was the key to everything. The end of the war, the fate of Zaria's people, and the survival of Earth itself. As they approached the entrance, the ground beneath them shook again, more violently this time. The soldiers, no, they were more than just soldiers, had found them. There was no escaping the inevitable now. Mark's heart pounded in his chest as he glanced over at Zaria. Her eyes were fixed on the vault, her expression one of quiet determination. But even she couldn't ignore the growing danger behind them. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice calm despite the urgency in the air. "Once we enter, they'll follow. But we can't stop now. This is it. This is the only chance we have." Mark nodded, but his mind was still reeling. The sheer weight of their mission, the countless battles they'd already fought, and the danger that lay ahead all threatened to overwhelm him. But Zaria was right. This was the only way forward. Together, they approached the massive stone doors of the vault. The symbols etched into the surface of the door seemed to pulse with energy, glowing faintly in the twilight. Mark reached out to touch them, feeling an odd sensation in the tips of his fingers. Something warm, something ancient. Zaria stepped beside him, her hand hovering near his. She could feel it too. "It's responding to you, Mark," she said softly. "The power, the energy, it's in you. You were always meant to be here." The realization struck him like a bolt of lightning. He wasn't just along for the ride. He was a part of this story, a part of the answer. The vault had chosen him, just as Zaria had. He was the key. Before he could say anything, the door groaned, shifting slowly as if waking from a long slumber. The stone was heavy, but it moved with ease, revealing a darkened passage beyond. The air inside was thick, filled with a heavy silence that seemed to hum with untold secrets. "Stay close," Zaria warned as she stepped into the darkness ahead, her wings folding tightly behind her. Mark followed her without hesitation, the flickering light of the vault's symbols guiding them forward. The passage was narrow, winding, and filled with ancient relics, fragments of a long-lost civilization that had once thrived here. Mark's breath quickened as he realized how much had been lost to time, how much had been hidden away. The walls were lined with strange inscriptions, similar to the symbols outside, their meaning lost to the ages. But Mark could feel them, feel the energy they contained, as if the entire vault was alive, breathing. "Where are we going?" Mark asked, his voice echoing slightly in the empty space. "To the heart of the vault," Zaria replied. "There's a chamber beneath this place. It's where the energy is stored, the power we need to stop them, to stop the war." Mark's stomach tightened. He had no idea what to expect, but the stakes were higher than ever. The enemy was closing in, and they had no time to waste. They had to find the power within this ancient place before it was too late. They reached the end of the narrow passage, where the walls suddenly opened up into a vast chamber. The space was enormous, filled with towering stone pillars and intricate carvings that seemed to shimmer with a faint ethereal glow. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, its surface covered in dust and ancient debris. But Mark could feel it, the pulse of energy that emanated from it, calling to him, drawing him in. "This is it," Zaria whispered, stepping forward. "This is where it all begins." Mark felt a mix of awe and fear as he approached the pedestal. He could sense the power that lay within it, ancient and untapped, just waiting for someone to unlock it. He placed his hand on the stone, and for a moment, everything went still. The chamber seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for him to make the final choice. Then, without warning, a voice echoed in his mind. It was deep, resonant, and filled with ancient wisdom. "The key has come. The one who bears the blood of the stars is ready. Will you wield the power to save your world? To rewrite the future?" Mark's heart raced as he realized that the voice was speaking to him, speaking to the very core of who he was. He wasn't just some random person caught in the middle of this war. He was part of something much larger, something far more significant. "Yes," Mark said, his voice firm, though his hands were shaking. "I will." At his words, the pedestal began to glow with a brilliant light, and the chamber filled with a humming energy. The walls seemed to pulse in rhythm with the light, and Mark could feel the power surging through his veins, as though the vault itself was coming alive. Zaria stepped back, her eyes wide with awe. "You did it," she whispered, her voice filled with reverence. "You've unlocked it. The energy is yours." Mark's mind swirled with the intensity of the moment, and for a split second, he felt as though the weight of the universe was resting on his shoulders. But as the power filled him, something else also filled him, something deeper, more familiar. It was the strength of his ancestors, the power of the stars. He wasn't just Mark anymore. He was part of something greater, something that spanned the galaxy, and he could feel the responsibility of it, the promise of what he had to do. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed in the chamber. Mark's heart sank as he turned to see the soldiers, the ones who had been hunting them, emerging from the shadows. They had found them, and they were not alone. Behind the soldiers, a figure stepped forward, tall, menacing, with eyes that burned with an unnatural fury. Mark could feel the malevolent presence of this new enemy even before he saw their face. It was the leader, the one who had orchestrated the destruction of Zaria's world. "We've finally found you," the leader said, his voice cold and filled with malice. "You think you can stop me? You're too late." Mark's breath caught in his throat, but as he looked back at the glowing pedestal, he realized something. This wasn't just about the fight. This was about what came next. They had unlocked the power. Now it was time to wield it. With a surge of energy, Mark lifted his hand, the power coursing through him, and he felt the vault's energy respond. The soldiers advanced, but before they could take another step, a powerful wave of force erupted from Mark's palm. It struck the soldiers with a blinding light, sending them flying back. The leader staggered but remained standing, his eyes narrowing in fury. "You think this is enough to defeat me?" the leader sneered. "You can't stop what's coming." Mark's eyes burned with determination. "I'm not alone in this," he said, his voice filled with certainty. "And neither are you." As the light continued to radiate from him, Mark felt Zaria's presence beside him, her wings unfurled, her eyes glowing with the same fierce resolve. Together, they were stronger than they had ever been before. The battle was far from over, but with the power of the vault at their command, they had a chance to save not only Zaria's world but Earth as well. The war was just beginning, but Mark knew one thing for sure: this was a fight they couldn't afford to lose. And as the first light of a new dawn broke through the vault's entrance, Mark realized that this was the beginning of something much bigger than he had ever imagined. A new journey had begun, and he was ready to face it head-on. The future was unwritten, and he was about to write it.